So I'm Reggie Manning with Vista Data. Our company focuses on AI data as well as it relates to education. We've done projects with schools as well as other companies just to bring education and overall that thought around how do we implement AI into the education platform and move it forward.
And hello, everyone. I'm Kenneth Sealsnut. I'm a software engineering manager at a company called Wizard AI, which is a conversational commerce startup in New York City based around being able to provide personal shopping assistance all over text messaging. And then I'm also a computer science researcher for Yale University and partner with a lot of research universities on building pipelines of applying industry best practices into research and academia, and also I'm co-founder of Science Stories, which is a passion project with a co-founder of mine and fellow researcher to amplify the life and works of women and people of color in the sciences.
So as we look at the topic, Kenneth and I have been chatting about it throughout the past couple of days. And one thing in particular is like, what is the effect of AI on humanity? Right? And so we're getting to somewhat a philosophical like conversation around it. But when you think about what is the impact that AI is having on society, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and I love that our topic starts with the word intersectionality. For me, that was a concerted effort in my career is to carve out a path that allowed me to stay in research while also in industry. And so for me, I've seen the impact of AI on humanity and the work we do is giving access to people that don't typically wear a software engineering hat. So in research libraries, there's a lot of good that's going on in big research institutions and small universities that are trying to find ways to digitize maybe their libraries, archives, or collections, or find ways for more representation to be brought into data sets by tapping into historians and archaeologists. And historically, you would need a professional software engineer to help to build out a full tech stack around it. And now some of these researchers are adapting themselves to be able to take on some of these tasks and write small lines of code that can now do a lot more than was before. And so I do think this hybrid model for employment, but also for people that have passion projects and work that is socially good, have new tools and new means to be able to benefit those communities they want to serve. And yeah, Reggie, I would love to hear how that translates too in the classroom and on the education side.
Yeah, so I've spoke about a project we did with a school in North Memphis, and students in middle school have had opportunity to learn the fundamentals of AI. And so throughout this coursework, they learn about machine learning, models, design thinking, those aspects of it. And it was really like inspired when you hear, like, you know the conversation and you know the coursework, but when you have a conversation with a 12-year-old and he's talking about design thinking, he's like, wait a minute, you get this, like you understand what's happening. And so I think when we look at it, like the effect on humanity, it's changing the trajectory of what kids are capable of doing, as well as the workforce. Like, what are the jobs of the future, right? Like, what are we going to need in skills that AI can help power us or power the future kids to do? So that aspect of it really is, we had other additional side conversations throughout the conference talking about like plumbing, right? Like it's a trade, but think about it from the standpoint of like, what effect would AI have on that from an education standpoint? Can you now have videos that interact with kids on teaching them how to be a plumber? Can you expedite the amount of training and learning around a trade? So I think the intersection of, the effect of AI on humanity has a multitude of applications.
Yeah, and my wife used to also be a teacher, and seeing how a huge problem in especially the public education system is teachers are often managing larger and larger class sizes, where many teachers are leaving the profession because the pay gap is so extraneous that this is only going to be a bigger and bigger problem throughout, especially the American education system for lower education. And thinking about how does AI impact that is it allows you to build out individualized course learning and pipelines that if maybe you read a little slower like I did as a child, instead of having to pull the teacher aside, I can maybe take a couple courses that a chatbot or assistant is helping me get caught up to speed, or maybe if you're a little bit more advanced, you'd be able to assign work programmatically instead of the teacher having to build out a course plan for every individual student, and then they can kind of guide and strategize across the classroom, and instead of kind of being pulled from student to student and underserving everyone in the process. And so it has been really cool seeing, the embrace of tech and AI in the classroom, and there's a lot of room a lot of work that we need to do around that, and I'd love to know how that process has been for your organization.
Yeah, and so as we talk about, the positive sides of it, there are some inherent risks, right? Like everyone's talked about it throughout, this weekend, is that, there are opportunities that we have to be careful of. Like AI will not replicate human thinking as a human. Like there's some gaps in emotional intelligence, as well as just the overall emotions of what's going on between the interaction of humans. But the effect of being able to have that in the classroom or beyond the classroom, you think about professional certifications, as well as like just degrees that you may, obtain. It's really pulling together like what are these components so how AI can actually, accent it all.
Yeah. Yeah, and in addition to the actual output of what AI can give, putting my software engineering hat on, it's forced us to build more resilient systems. Before having tools that had non-deterministic output, it was very easy to test, it was very easy to unit test, but every software engineer, especially a software engineering manager, had to deal with it worked on my machine, but then I deployed it to production and something changed and now there's a bug. Now we're comfortable with dealing with that ambiguity of, I might write a function, the output is unpredictable, so how do I start thinking about what happens in those contingency moments at the beginning of the process, instead of, if there's an accident or if there's a bug or if there's a critical failure, then trying to build more infrastructure around it. It's kind of baked into the model, and so it's been interesting thinking about, as AI is getting more advanced, we're also becoming more skeptical and more critical in how we build our platforms and our projects, so that they can adapt and scale with uncertainty, which is something that historically we just haven't been able to do that well, is to move quickly in an uncertain world.
Yeah. So I think that's a great segue to the flip side of the coin, right? Like we talked about AI's effect on humanity. What is humanity's effect on AI? And from my perspective, I feel like the biases of humans affect AI in terms of the programming and the training. So it's as good as we are, right? Like it's learning from us, and if we're flawed, then it's going to be inherently flawed to some degree. So I think the opportunity is like, how do we mitigate the biases of humans to influence the AI? Because it doesn't have an emotion, it doesn't have a bias. It's just whatever we put on it. I almost think of it as like, in a relationship or with kids, like you're going to mirror what you see. And so if you're putting out bad information or you have bad behaviors, then they're going to see those come back to you. And if you have a machine that's programmed and trained on it, then you're going to get the output of what you train it.
Yeah, I mean, and also, like you said, we kind of get what we put out, or get out what we put in. Also, defining that we is important too. And a big issue that I would see, and what actually brought me into kind of not only working in industry, but also trying to use my skills to help with research projects, is a lot of research is around how do you amplify data sets that aren't available today. So if you're building maybe a corpus that's doing image detection, Zoom has a big, had a lot of extensive research on how do you do like programmatic lighting adjustments during the pandemic, but they didn't have enough image data on people with a lot of melanin in their skin, and so everyone still looks like a shadow, and whenever that filter gets applied, that's just a lack of training data. And even well-intentioned full companies like Zoom were really just trying to help avoid the costs and a burden of building professional lighting for a remote workforce. The data itself becomes the issue that's a barrier for how, or at least a cap on how much innovation you can build off of that. And so some of the work that I've been doing is around allowing content that historically was not on the web or not digital, and finding ways that we can digitize that. For me, a lot of language models are built on knowledge corpuses. And so I help build knowledge graphs for libraries that might want to do a research project on, one of them is with Rutgers that I'm partnered with, is building the bibliography of all Black authors from the time of the beginning of American history on to today, which is a data set that just doesn't exist today. But there's so much print material that the data itself is there, it's just not digitized. And so how do you structure that in a knowledge graph in a way that a large language model can also understand and interpret and can be used in future training data sets? And there's many applications out there that are similar, where I'm also working with Johns Hopkins School of Public Health on nutrition data. Food deserts are a very common thing, and especially in urban areas or very far out rural areas throughout the world, where you could be in a very vibrant city, but based on your block, you might not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And your nutrition might have to be structured very differently based on how far you have to commute to get, the ingredient makeup that makes your diet nutritional rich. And so I'm working with Johns Hopkins on a way to identify across other countries, how do we make a knowledge graph that's standardized through all the food composition tables, which are similar to like the USDA today in the US, but every country has their own. And how can we break those down and aggregate them in a way that you can generate nutritional data off of that, that can allow you to pinpoint these hotspots of food deserts that we often would overlook, even in cities like LA and New York City, where there's plenty of people, but it's very hard in a micro level to make sure that everyone has the nutrition they need.
Yeah. So, audience, we think about this is a unique point in history where we can actually write, what the models and the knowledge corpuses contain. What are some things as humans that we can do to influence AI in a way that it betters us all, right? Like, I think from the history of this country, there's some things that have been done well and things that could have been improved. So as we look forward, like, we have another opportunity to rewrite and cultivate what we want the outcomes, or at least the transfer of knowledge to be. And what you're doing with, upskilling it to underrepresented communities and people who aren't represented well, like, what are some other things that we could do to really enhance the opportunity and the tool of itself for the future?
Yeah.
Overall, it's about the data. So I think AI will work itself out long term, just because people use it and use it and use it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to filter out the voices and things that are not supposed to be there, or things that are causing those issues, I think. And as companies look at it, they're going to filter it out too. So I think it's going to have a natural progression forward. So what we can do is just keep working with it.
Yeah.
Keep telling companies, hey, this thing, the AI gave me bad data right here, or this is bad, fix it. And I think if you put it on the companies, it'll solve itself really fast.
Yeah, and then finding areas there's synergies in building that data set too, I think is important. Where if every company is building their own, model and their own, start foundational data, well, we're all starting from the same starting point. Nobody's building on each other's work, and so we're only going to go so far. And finding areas that we can kind of build, and maybe not completely open source for every, proprietary piece of technology, but a lot of data is can be structured in a way that's not personal data, but data that can be used for generative AI and other forms of machine learning, that we can collaboratively build these data sets and regulate them and monitor and make sure that they're culturally reflective and appropriate as well.
So another, while I was researching this topic and just seeing what's out there on it, one thing we came across is the idea of creativity, right? Like creativity in AI. So you can write a prompt, it gives you a picture. And then that picture, you revise it, you say it's not quite it, or you may go with it. So I think it becomes a point, and this is more of a question to think about, who's driving which level of creativity? Is what's created by the machine tell you this is good, or is it the other way around that you tell the machine like, nah, I don't like that? Or is your creativity prompted because of something you saw as a starting point?
Yeah, I mean, on the creativity piece, I think there's definitely a cycle there, and we've seen that in every industry. I think fashion is a important industry that you kind of ask that question of,
Right.
are we dictating trends or is somebody predicting the trend and we're all matching that? And yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned something, you say you're digitizing black authors,
Yeah, they're bibliographies and print media, yeah,
so then that data has not been digital?
correct,
So that means so black voices are not being put on the bottom, right?
correct.
That's some very important work that you're doing.
Yeah, and there's so many versions of that. And for me, it was personal where I got into software engineering not knowing the impact that my grandmother had on programming. And I didn't know at the time that this was a woman's profession, and today it's so male-dominated. And thinking about how do we forget that history. And for me, it was more of a history project. I just wanted to have something that I could remind myself that here are all of the heroes throughout, history that made the projects that we benefit from today. Grace Hopper building the first programming language, the first piece of software that was a functional programming language. It's something that doesn't really get talked about as much as Steve Jobs and Alan Turing, for example, as key like computational figures. And so for me, it was like, okay, this curiosity of how can we put more people in. A lot of times, if you don't know they exist, there's no way to search for them online. There's nowhere for you to find out. And sometimes it's just as simple as search engine optimization, like what every business would do if they were trying to break themselves on the web. How can we build search engine optimizations for content and knowledge? And so that's where I focused on building knowledge graphs, and all search engines are driven by knowledge graph curation and the catalog of search links. And so by me finding ways to digitize content and then also making it publicly available through a link on the web, and then pinging in the same knowledge graph that Google and Mozilla both hit, okay, now this is a search result that actually turns up when somebody searches who is the first, female physicist in my city. And you'd be able to find that content. And everyone has their own passions and own projects. And so I've kind of turned that into a service in itself where I can help other universities tackle their own domains and the things that they're confident in or want to be able to see more of in the world. Yeah.
I think, yesterday we spoke about diversity within AI,
Right.
And, we spoke about having people be part of the building of the model.
Yeah.
But in this case, what you're saying is that it's not just having people working in the field, it's about the data going in.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Having diverse voices,
Mhm.
training them on, right? Because you might say that was one version of the truth.
Yeah.
Might.
Exactly.
Might. Yeah.
You will.
Yeah.
So, when Jen and I first came out, I saw it have some major issues.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think there's a good, you can't put too much control on it, I think. I think you have to leave it with all biases put in
Mhm.
on real data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an example.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also an example where it's not just from the data standpoint. Like the data was there. It really was how the implementation happened that
Right.
where more bias, like it created these weird
Biases.
outputs that aren't even humanly possible, and you kind of swing very far the other direction. But that's still, the data being there is still important, and that's also how you correct these mistakes, is more data and more examples, and finding more ways to accomplish very niche questions that we ask of our data.
Yeah. And also you think about just the democratization of access to contribute to the data. Like if you don't know about large language models and knowledge corpuses, how can you contribute to it? Right. So I think
Yeah.
it's our responsibility to be evangelists to, spread the word, give access, create programs and projects through education, nonprofits, where kids and young adults and even older adults can have access to influence and contribute to the overall knowledge corpus, so we can have a more well-rounded thought model of what the outputs are.
Yeah, this is very much a left and right brain
Yeah.
type of problem where, in terms of structuring data and bringing more example data in, It's going to take a lot of designers building new interfaces that we haven't thought of before. And do you have a point there? Yeah.
If you look at African voices from the continent, there's no, their voices aren't being put into this model.
Yep.
Right? So as a global, citizen, we just sort of getting a very one-dimensional
Yep.
view of the world, which, you know, fortunately and unfortunately, is the way it is, but if we can, as you said, democratize it,
Mhm.
Yeah.
we can start bringing in more voices.
Yeah.
More authors from not just, you know, North America, but, you know, from the continent. There's
Yep.
so many authors from Nigeria, South Africa.
And it all doesn't have to reside in one model, right? Like, at least have opportunity to access that model of African heritage, right? Like, it doesn't have to be in all of them, but as a start, like, let's have these different corridors where we can access this data and this information.
But the point is any of that data being put into any one right now? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. It depends on what the company is and what their goals are and the responsibilities that they hold themselves to until there are, regulations in place. I think for me as a software engineer, that's something that I'm always thinking about too. And whenever I help with these types of research projects, even though I don't speak multiple languages, I make sure that the data model itself is multilingual from its core. So everything is machine actionable with unique unique disambiguated IDs that are numbers, and then those are bound to human language. And so that allows you to build pipelines that if I say this in English, I'm also not boxing out someone who only speaks another language. They can also contribute the data that might be talking about the same concept in their own language. And so then over time, you can then build models that complete that data across other languages that speak that overlap, but then you can generate things that kind of fill in those holes where very often overlooked languages, especially in African countries, have a lot of the same research projects and research going in, but then they don't have the funding that a Google might pitch towards a company that's based in Europe or North America. And so these are some of the areas that interoperability kind of has multiple levels there. And it's about what are you giving a data set and how can you structure it in a way that actually does address these needs versus you're just generating data that only serves one community.
Yeah, I guess to kind of tie it all together, as we discuss back and forth, it's really humans' effect on AI, right? Humanity's effect on AI because it's what we put in it,
Yeah.
it's how we structure it, it's how it's searchable, it's how the knowledge corpus all works together that really affects the outputs of it, like garbage in, garbage out. So I think the onus is on us as humans to, I feel like us as humans, but for humans to really create and be very thoughtful about the models that we create and that we train, because it's going to be trained off of who we are. So if we can be better people, we can get better outputs on the overall training and how we can use it as a tool.
Yeah. Any other questions or anything or comments? We can totally make this casual. We have 5 minutes. Reggie, I was also curious to know when you're going into schools. I know you have a lot of experience with charter schools and in the education system. What is it like making those intro conversations with maybe an administration head, that you want to partner with?
Yeah. So initially when we go in, it's a problem set, right? Like what problem are you trying to solve? And what we've seen is that everyone kind of knows this narrative of education where there's a teacher shortage, they're overworked, it's not enough resources for tutoring to fill in the gap. So we approach it from the idea, the case study of like, how can we leverage technology to help shore up the gaps? So applying a AI tutor, which understands the student's background, can help them shore up some of the gaps, and the back and forth exchange with them will then dictate, what you need to teach next, or if you can stay on it a little longer. So understanding like the really problem set and how you can customize an AI tool to solve this problem is kind of where we start. Like we can dial in and customize and do some other aspects of it, but it's really like understanding like this is a tool. Like I described yesterday, it's fire, right? Whether you put fire in a fireplace and you do marshmallows over it, or do you create steam to move an engine and boil water, Or is it you just let it run wild? And I don't think anyone wants to let fire run wild because it just keeps consuming. So understanding the aspect of like what problem are we solving and how can we light a candle to something of a tea leaf to create a nice scent in the air. So, just the application of the tool and, using it in a form that can help solve your problems and make life better for those around us.
Yeah, it's super inspiring work too. I know we were talking about your students do a capstone project with the community. When I was thinking about that in terms of how the interplay of giving someone access to technology immediately can impact so many more people beyond them. I'd love if you could talk about like what are some of those projects that stemmed out of that. Yeah.
So I was telling about earlier that the students go through the curriculum and their capstone project is that for them to learn how to create a chatbot. So they actually created a chatbot for multiple community organizations as a group, and one in particular is for the Chamber of Commerce. So there's going to be a live bot on the Chamber of Commerce site where small businesses can search resources and converse with a chatbot to tell them where they are, how to access them, and the whole deal. So it's bringing them into the community, it's connecting them with businesses to say, well, we have better access to these resources now because this chatbot is on our site. But the fact that 12-year-olds are learning large language models and creating this just shows you if you give them access to it, then they can create. A lot of times they just don't have access to it. So what's really inspiring, the work around the city and connecting the workforce and the work-based learning to being able to help small businesses thrive by something a middle school student did, learning a life skill that's transferable. So that's some of the work we're working on, looking to continue with those projects.
Yeah, and tying it too back to how does AI impact the way we're thinking and it's really cool to see that AI and tech are now becoming cool again for school students and more people are not just focusing on access, but also just exposure to you can do this. I think that's something very easy to do is just tell someone, hey, you can learn how to code, you can learn prompts, you can learn LLMs, where it's so easy we often don't realize we can do that. Yeah. And it's very scalable. You can tell 1,000 people that very easily without spending a dime. And oftentimes the gaps are met because a lot of students just don't know. If you're not growing up with this, someone knowing how to code in your family or a friend, that is an engineer, you're not gonna find out that you can do those skills. And so work that you're doing is just very, very impactful for the communities. And so when I see that happen in higher education and people are excited about, being a software engineer because they have a bigger mission is where I get excited. And not just for writing code, but building something that actually impacts humanity. And so it really starts at as ground floor as you can get when 12-year-olds being able to work with the Chamber of Commerce is incredible.
I just think about when I was 12, like I had a lot of focus and tenacity of conquering Mario Brothers, right? Like I was going to save the princess, I was going to, traverse through the different levels. But you take that same focus and give it to a kid on creating a large language model, or well, not creating a large language model, but being able to create a chatbot.
Leveraging it,
Yeah, like it's the same focus and the same skill set. It's just directing it with intentionality for them to be set up for something greater. Yeah.
And kids too are very curious, and I think that's what makes video games so fun is you're always thinking and strategizing and breaking it down. How can you get to that next level?
Cheat codes.
Yeah, with LLMs, it goes from we teach them how to use it, and now their curiosity goes, how do we build this? How do we build against it? Well, how is it made? And it really brings that curiosity deeper and deeper as they progress throughout their education. And so, thank you for the panel, and it was a great discussion.
Oh, well, thank you guys for sharing all your knowledge. It was such an engaging fireside chat. We're happy to have you.